Hey guys, welcome back. Today, we are talking about lakes and how deep they are. The topic might seem kind of dry, but I assure you, there are some interesting things to talk about. For instance, if any of them are actually bottomless, how deep the magma in Death Mountain is, and if objects will sink deep enough to despawn. I think what I reveal today will be surprising. Let's play a little game. Here are a list of lakes that I will be presenting the answer to later. Go ahead and make your guesses now as to how deep you think they are. Maybe writing them down on whatever. Remember that this game uses meters, but I'll be providing a conversion for feet as well. Afterwards, let me know in the comments how many you got right. Now, kick back and relax while I walk you through it. Let's talk about bottomless lakes. Part 1. The Measuring Stick. I wanted to explain how I measured all of this first, just so we are on the same page. First and foremost, I should go over a base assumption about the game, which is that its coordinate system is based on meters. I think everybody is assuming this, but it's not stated in the game anywhere. At least not to my knowledge. Given that the game is Japanese and how things scale, it seems likely that things are measured using meters. We can see a strong consistency in the game around this. For example, a lot of building materials line up with these measurements. Theoretically, you could line these materials across the entire map measuring it, and it should line up perfectly with the invisible walls of the map. And before any of you ask, no, I'm not doing that. With this established, I need to build a practical measuring device that I could reliably use to measure these bodies of water. As I'm sure that you are all aware, there is a hard cap of 21 items glued together, which limits just how large of a measuring stick I can create. You may also know that Zenai devices will only remain powered if they are close to Link. And so, for a lot of these measuring devices, 2 slots are being taken up by a stabilizer and a battery. 2 more slots are being taken up by the base, which is made from these pieces from the building block shrine over in the Forgotten Temple. When combined, they make a perfect cube, 4 by 4 meters, which lines up with the wooden beams left around the kingdom by Hudson's company. I ended up using these stone poles from the Maya-Chin shrine. That's the one in central Hyrule where you have to build a bat to hit a ball. Anyhow, these stone ones are ideal because they are exactly 4 meters tall, just like the wooden beams. After gluing all that stuff together and creating an auto-build recipe, I now had something I could use over and over again. We now have everything we need to measure lakes, so let's get moving. Part 2. The Lakes of Hyrule. First up is Skull Lake. This one is the most interesting because I speculated in the past that it was literally bottomless. It also has these strange glowing flowers in it, which may be growing up from the depths. They are rather unique and pretty, though I think they might really just exist to make Kilton appear more creepy when you first encounter him in Breath of the Wild. Anyhow, they do seem to be growing up from something, so let's see if there's a bottom. Taking the measuring stick out and dropping it into the water shows that there is indeed a bottom. The bottom is out of sight, so I ended up having to use recall to light the whole thing up. And from there, it is a simple matter of counting the units. As a result, we can now count that there are 13.5 units. Multiply that by 4 and we get 54 meters, or 177 feet deep. That's pretty deep, but not bottomless like I hoped. And for note, the ceiling of the depths is around negative 350. It varies a little from place to place, but the measurements I took generally worked out to about that. Next up, I wanted to see how deep Lake Hylia was, and given the past lore about it from other games, and maybe further show that Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom are indeed a reboot or reimagining of the series. Anyhow, I measured both sides of the bridge, with the bridge itself being built on a bit more shallow of an area. Anyhow, in both cases, I found that the lake was 20 meters or 65 feet deep. Checking over at Lindor's Lake, as I'm calling it, the lake south of Lindor Tower, and previously the site of Ashika Tower. One thing I noticed is that there is a clear bottom to this location now, using the measuring device at the center. We can see that it is a mere 26 meters or 85 feet deep. Deeper than Lake Hylia. Interesting. But not the shaft into the underworld that I was hoping to find. Speaking of Bottomless, I checked the Bottomless pond in a previous video. I went ahead and revisited it here. It is a measly 6 meters or just about 20 feet deep. What a disappointment. The name seems to be a carryover from the Bottomless Bog here in Breath of the Wild. It is likely that the Bottomless Bog got its name because it would feel bottomless for any poor soul who got stuck in it. Perhaps they merely carried the name over after it was cleaned up. Since we are talking about the depths, I checked a few bodies of water down there as well. First up is the Secret Spring of Resurrection. Dipping into these refreshing waters again reveals that it is about 7 meters deep, or 23 feet. I really wish there was more to this place. What a missed opportunity. Close by is the Floating Coliseum, also known as the Lionel Pit. Let's see if it really is floating. Checking the water around it, we can find that it is 19 meters deep, or 62 feet. That's pretty good, but again, I'm disappointed by the name. In my Lake Mabe video, I brought up the broken water chamber under Spectacle Rock. Checking that out now, we can see that it is 19 meters deep, or 62 feet. An interesting correlation to the Floating Coliseum. On a side note, I've come to realize that this hole is likely a reference to Zelda 1, where you would blow a hole in Spectacle Rock to access level 9, Ganon's lair. Remember, those who don't have Triforce cannot come in. Moving along, let's take a break and head to the sky. While I'm not expecting this one to be bottomless, I wanted to take a look at the Sky Lake on the Great Sky Island. I was very curious because in the future I plan to calculate a few things involving the huge hover spike under this island. All the same, a simple measurement shows 11 meters or 36 feet deep. I expected it to be deeper, to be honest. Next up is the River of the Dead on the Great Plateau. I chose this one because I suspect this area on the Great Sky Island was pulled from this location. Basically, the Great Sky Island seems to be made up of multiple land masses. And so, that frozen area might have been pulled directly from the Great Plateau. It would explain why both places are the only places in the game to have this freezing water. Anyhow, it turns out it is about 7 meters deep, or 23 feet. That feels about right, considering that the Hylians put these poles in it to help cross it before the calamity. Also, there's a Korok here. Yatta! Those were the interesting ones that I found that didn't involve me making a longer measuring stick. And so, with them out of the way, let's move on to the Deep Boys. Before we get to that though, are you enjoying the video? If you are, could you please give it a like and subscribe to help the channel grow? Hopefully by the end of this video I will have earned your subscription. Now, let's get back to measuring. Part 3. The Deep Boys. While out in the field, I found a few instances that were too deep for my measuring stick, and so I had to build a longer one. I originally tried to make one from the Jenga blocks from the Jochi-Iyu Shrine up by the Akala Tech Lab. They proved to be way too heavy even with a stabilizer. Instead, I ended up using this metal grate, which is light and conveniently has these marks on it at 3 meters each. It can be found in the shrine by the Mifa statue. It was a struggle to put these together because each panel is 12 meters tall, and the upper limit for raising something with Ultra Hand isn't all that high. Eventually, using the side of Terrytown as a support, I managed to make a measuring stick that was exactly 100 meters tall, perfect for this. So moving along, it was time to hit the Deep Boys. The first stop being over at the East Reservoir. We know that there is a small dungeon under it that we explored during the Zora quest chain. And so, the question is, just how deep is the water here? And how far is this whirlpool that Sidon made actually taking Link? Well, it turns out that the East Reservoir is 96 meters deep, just under 100. That's 315 feet deep. I'm happy to see this because you might recall in Breath of the Wild that Valruta was submerged in this location. I do not know exactly how tall the Divine Beasts were, but for the moment, I am willing to accept that Valruta could have been submerged in 100 meters. So this checks out. As for the South Reservoir, you might also recall that after Valruta was liberated, Mipha moved the beast to a resting position here. In that cutscene, we see Vah-Ruta rise up from the water, which implies that there is some underwater passage large enough to accommodate the machine. I was expecting this to be 100 meters deep as well, but after measuring it, it turns out it's only 79 meters, or 259 feet. It's a little hard to imagine that Vah-Ruta could have fit through all of that, but perhaps it did. There is also the possibility that debris is littering the bottom of the hole, so it can be overlooked for now. Moving along, I wanted to check the depth of the water around Rito Village. I didn't suspect that there was anything on the bottom of Lake Totori. I was just curious how deep it was, and it turns out to be exactly 100 meters deep, or 328 feet. That's interesting considering that the water source seems to be completely cut off, but perhaps during certain seasons, water will flow into it from Hebra Plunge. Another place that I wanted to measure was around the Deku Forest, specifically around Mekar Island. Mekar is unusual. You might recall how I did a mystery on it a bit ago. Mekar seems to be on the edge of a very deep drop into the water. On one side, it is only 14 meters or 46 feet deep. A little further out on the other side, it is over 100 meters deep. That's over 328 feet. Now, I can see the top of my measuring stick here, so maybe another 10 meters on top of that. After observing the map, it would seem that any place that has dark blue water on the map has depths that are approaching 100 or more meters deep. This makes sense. I'm rather sad that I didn't find anything that was actually bottomless though. There is, however, one more place on my checklist. The Magma Lake under Death Mountain. You see, in Breath of the Wild, Death Mountain was shown to be filled with magma. We could see it from Bob Rudania while doing the Divine Beast dungeon. That would imply that this chamber was at one point completely filled, and had enough pressure to shoot magma up out of the volcano. Now of course, looking around, we can see that magma would have spilled out into the depths if that was the case. That is unless there was something keeping the magma contained to this area, but I'm not tackling that mystery today. All I want is to see how deep this magma is. Making my way to this mushroom plant thing in the center, past this partially submerged statue of an ancient Goron, I set up my measuring device and found out that it is exactly 1 meter deep. What? For consistency, that's about 3.3 feet. I did a few other checks with lava sources too, including over by the Fire Temple. It would seem a choice was made during development that all lava should be shallow in the game. This was likely so Zonai devices with big wheels would be able to traverse it. I guess that makes sense from a meta reason, but there are parts of the game where it simply doesn't feel justified, and this is one of them. The statue here is clearly submerged in magma, and yet it seems that the magma is only 1 meter deep. There are times when it is hard to suspend my disbelief with this game, and I have to say this is one of them. Anyhow, let's talk about the implications of all these measurements now that we have them. Part 4. The Implications. Now that we have all of my findings, we need to discuss a few things that make it really hard to justify these things. More importantly, talk about aspects of game design and world building that are revealed from this. Am I wrong in saying that Hyrule feels lacking in features? I know that the game has a lot of things going on in it, hundreds of hours of exploration, and yet when I take a step back, this world feels incomplete with the world itself. I know not everything is explorable. This isn't Minecraft where we can dig up the whole map. Though, if we could, I imagine that this map would reveal a lot of barren dead space with endless amounts of dirt. It seems like some places don't fit, or aren't deep enough, or that there are puzzles in the air that we are not given the freedom to reassemble, that is, without ripping the assets and putting them in Blender or something. I already talked about how the shallow lava doesn't make the most sense, but from a gameplay perspective, it is understandable. Certain places in this world seem like they should be a lot deeper. Lake Hylia, for instance, I would have expected to be deeper. However, after looking up some information on lakes in the real world, apparently the average depth is 10 meters. And so, Lake Hyrule is actually pretty deep compared to real-world lakes. When we look at this side chart I made for Hyrule Castle and its chasm, a chart I would point out is to scale at least vertically. We can see how even the deepest parts of these waters would go down less than 10% of where the imprisoning chamber is. The depths themselves, outside of a few special locations like Gloom's Lair, usually end up at -300 to -600 meters, not even a full kilometer underground. Of course, Gloom's Lair is very deep and large. It could be a gaping cavity that goes down who knows where, but that is outside the scope of what I have covered today. With all of that said, let's take the real world into account and look at the depths of the oceans. On this chart, we can see how the oceans are far more deep than even the depths of Hyrule. Granted, Gloom's Lair may be unimaginably deep, and I honestly would love to explore that. But even with the deepest parts of this world that we can reach, it pales in comparison to how deep things could ultimately be. If you look at other planets in our solar system, you will find cliffs so deep and so sharp that it makes the entire height of Hyrule seem shallow in comparison. It was the goals of the creators of this game to create a world that seemed realistic enough to explore and get lost in. To experience the mountains, see amazing sunsets, and awe at sights that may be impossible in the real world, though plausible if we suspend our disbelief. By prodding and poking, measuring what wasn't meant to be measured, I think I may have pulled back a layer of that wonder, and exposed some of the things that suspiciously line up with values rooted in the mechanical structure of the world. I am tempted to say they should have done better, but I can't ignore that it took them 6 years to make this, and that what they have created is truly stunning. I will end this by saying that it has been a joy to explore this world, and I look forward to exploring it more and trying to solve even more mysteries. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I know I said this week I was going to do a heavier lore video, but I'm doing more research on that before I drop it. Plus, I couldn't resist the urge to use my new measuring stick in-game. Anyhow, if you haven't already, a like and subscribe would go a long ways to helping out around here. If you can do more, come join my Patreon or become a channel member. Seriously, this channel couldn't keep going without the generous support from them. So come join us and get your name listed down below. You'll also gain access to my Discord, where we can talk more directly about things concerning upcoming topics. You'll also gain access to more personal posts from me as a gamer. That's all I got for you today. Be safe and may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.